we take tonight's story from Luke chapter 16, verses 1 through 9. And it's a great, interesting, perplexing story. So we're going to dig right in. First of all, I want to remind you that we love telling stories at the Well. We think stories help us dig in deeper and ask better questions. Stories help us think through figuring out those perplexities in our faith. Stories have this ability to move us to action and to connect us with joys and wounds that we carry. They also make our world bigger, and we realize there's so much more to know. And a story can also make our world smaller and help us recognize how much we have in common with another person or another person's experience. But mostly, they often just show us a part of ourselves that we did not see before. And without the 3-point sermon, the story just can embed itself into our identity and help us just think and look at life with different eyes. Jesus loved storytelling. He was always telling stories. And you know, his 4 biographers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, when they weren't telling the stories about Jesus' life and the events of his life, they were most of the rest of the time retelling the stories that Jesus told. And these stories are often called parables, and Jesus loved telling them. And they are the perfect kind of story for what we do in community dinners. They beg us to ask questions and often make us kind of like scratch our heads and go, what? I don't understand, which his friends did also. So we gather and we connect with these characters and we try to see ourselves in the story. And often when we do storytelling at the Well, we want to ask ourselves, what would that story look like today? So I want to share this story with you from Luke 16, 1 through 9, but I'm going to retell it as if it happened today. And I live in Tulsa, so there'll be some names in here that you recognize if you're from Tulsa. Like, what would this story look like if Jesus was throwing it out there to a group of us today? So Jesus was hanging out with his friends and his apprentices at McNally's pub one Thursday evening. And it had been a really tough couple of days for them. They had visited City Hall to advocate for better housing for the homelessness issue in the city, and had heard all the reasons why a tiny house village was a zoning issue. They had gone to the Children's Hospital and cheered up patients who were very sick with some silly games and skits. I'm trying to picture that, but I thought that was a fun way of thinking about how they spent their time. And in the midst of this really tiring and difficult week, a very influential large church had pushed back in a very public way about how Jesus and his friends and his apprentices were doing ministry, because they were in bars and they were in clubs and they were having dinner with owners of questionable establishments. So they're here at dinner and they're kind of just letting go. There's a lot of joking around and blowing off steam from a difficult week while they drink their drinks and eat their burgers at McNally's. By the way, the dinner was compliments of a questionable business owner also. And after dinner, Jesus began to tell a story, something that he did very often. So this is how they knew the story was getting ready to start. Jesus would say, "There once was," and everybody would be quiet and they'd be like, "Oh, he's telling a story." So Jesus says, "There once was," and everyone gets quiet, "a very wealthy owner of a building company who had a senior manager of all the commercial accounts. And this owner had been hearing rumors that his manager was charging dry cleaning and family meals and even a couple of short little vacations as business expenses. And when accounting confirmed these rumors to the owner called in his senior manager and he showed him the report and he said, "Hey, what were you doing? Using company money for personal gain." He looks at the guy and goes, "Listen, we're going to be auditing all of your expense reports for the last 5 years. So I need you to go get all those accounts that you have managed, bring them back to me. Then you need to pack up your office and go. You are fired. Security will escort you out." He's not having a very good day. Interestingly, the senior manager does not admit that he did anything wrong. He doesn't beg for his job or argue with his boss. He thinks of one thing. He's like, what am I going to do? How am I going to pay my bills? Nobody's going to hire me when they hear about this. I've been spending a whole lot of money and not saving any. And the job market's terrible right now. So all he can think of is, who's going to want to help me if they hear that I did all this? So as he's gathering the files in his office, he has an idea. He says, okay, wait. I know how to get into the good graces of some people that might help me after I have to leave here. So one by one, he calls his contacts for each of the overdue accounts that he managed. And he has a conversation with each of them that goes like this. Hey, how much does your ledger show that you owe us? Okay, I'm going to give you a discount if you'll pay immediately. See, they don't know he's been fired. So one by one, he talks to them. There was a new building project for a soda company. He cut their bill by 25%. Then he gave the yoga center a 20% discount and then called the cookie store and chipped off 15% of their renovation costs. One by one, he got 8 accounts to pay up in full with the discounts that he offered. When he finished, he gathered up the account files, turned them in, went back, packed up his office, and left with his desk belongings, pictures, and candy stash all in a cardboard box as security walked him out the front doors. The next day, the owner of the building company was going through all of these files, these account files, and he comes upon the 8 overdue accounts, and he sees that they have been paid in full with the discounts, but their bills had been paid. He's actually super impressed. I don't know how he felt about the discounts, but he had a bit of admiration for this very clever, manipulative, not very honest employee that he had just let go. And he says, clever guy. He just might make it if he would stop skimming off the top. So there was this admiration, this sense of, good job. I mean, it's something. Just picture yourself sitting at McNelly's as Jesus finishes the story. You know, we've got the story of the Good Samaritan. We've got the story of the lost sheep and the lost son. We have the story of the parable of the mustard seed. All of these, even though maybe it takes a little bit of work to think about what they might mean for us, they all point us in a very positive direction. And then we have this story that is called the story of the shrewd manager who cheated on his boss, got caught, lost his job, but before he left, made sure that he had given everyone that owed his company something a discount, cut their bill so that they would be so grateful for him and maybe welcome him into their fold after he got kicked out of his job. I can just see Jesus' friends looking at him, scratching their heads, going, what are we supposed to do with this? What are we supposed to get out of this little story about cheating and lying and self-preservation? What, Jesus? We don't know. And it seems like Jesus would just allow a really good amount of long pause for them to contemplate. And then he said this, and this is Eugene Peterson's words from The Message. Streetwise people are smarter in this regard than law-abiding citizens. They are on constant alert, looking for angles, surviving by their wits. I want you to be smart in the same way, but for what is right, using every adversity to stimulate you to creative survival, to concentrate your attention on the bare essentials so that you'll live, really live, and not complacently and just doing what you need to do to get by on good behavior. Jesus seems to think that we might need to step out of our boxes of how we do things, that we might need to be creative, clever, subversive. He wants us to be smart in the same way that others are smart, but for good and for the right reasons and for the right things. To not lose sight that sometimes things have to get turned upside down for God's work in this world to get done. To yank the rug out. We have to do something we would not have done before because it's scary or different, or maybe even just a little bit unorthodox. But it leaves an impression and gets people's attention. And then they want to know where it came from. I want you to be smart in the same way, but for what is right. There's a few questions that are going to follow on the stream that as you're listening to the music, I want to encourage you to just think about, like, what makes you scratch your head when you hear this story? What makes you go, what? A plus B is not equaling C. Like, what just kind of throws you with this story? But here's another question. Where do you see yourself in this narrative? There's a lot of different places we could see ourselves. And how might we understand God better through the lens of this story? Sometimes we have God in a very pristine, soft, delicate, beautiful, shiny frame. And I wonder sometimes if he wants to bust out of that frame. Doesn't want us to frame him in. What would it look like for me to be smart in the same way as this clever, fired manager? What would that look like? And how can I use that for what is good and what is right in my world? And then lastly, what do you do with a story like this? What do you wake up on Monday morning and do differently?